Hey, everybody, welcome back to Engaging this Phenomenon. And today we have the honor of having on Dr. Michael P. Masters. And Dr. Michael P. Masters is professor of biological anthropology. He's the author of Identified Flying Objects, the Extraterrestrial Model, and Revelation, the Future of Human Past. So welcome, Michael.
Thanks, James. Good to be here. Long time no see. I think it's been, what, 7 or 8 months now, probably.
It's been actually, I think it's been 14 months because there's April, I think, unless in my April 2023, you were at the Inquire Anomalous conference. I believe it was.
You are mistaken, sir. You are mistaken. It was the most recent one in December. I was just there.
Oh
I think
God.
it was December
yeah.
10th. Yeah.
So, oh wow, yeah. So that's wow.
So I
That's
guess
a
we're
lot more
both
recent.
wrong. Yeah, I guess we're
My
both
time is
wrong.
flying. Yeah,
That
I
was
feel
only
like
about 6 months ago.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
time is fictitious anyway, so
yeah,
I guess
and
we're both right and we're both wrong.
yeah, it was great to have you there, and
Yeah, fantastic event. You and Jay did an awesome job with that.
yeah, especially Jay pulled some superhero moves to get your presentation set.
Yeah, all the rest of them, everybody ended up using that laptop. It was yeah, he was my knight in shining armor that day. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I've been meaning to have you on Engaging the Phenomenon for a long time now, and it's just just the way things go. So there's a number of things I want to discuss with you. But just for people listening, in case this may be the first time that they're hearing about you, probably not, but just in case, could you just give a little background about yourself?
Yeah, so as you mentioned in the intro there, I'm a professor of anthropology at Montana Technological University in Butte, Montana. Most of my research historically has focused on craniofacial variation among modern humans, also hominin evolutionary anatomy, comparative anatomy. I've also done some archaeological digs in South Africa, southern France. I've run some field schools here in Montana and some prehistoric Native American sites dating back to about the Middle Archaic, 7,000 years ago, all the way up into modern times. Yeah, got into the UFO thing when I was about 8 or 9 years old. Had some questions arise, and then decided to really start pursuing it academically in 2012. Hired a couple research assistants and started writing my first book that I published in 2019. Identified Flying Objects, a multidisciplinary scientific examination of the UFO phenomenon, which does that, takes a multidisciplinary perspective and applies it to this question to see largely if they could be us. The main hypothesis I advocate for, while acknowledging that it doesn't explain all of the nuances of the phenomenon, is that they could be our future human descendants coming back through time to visit and study us in their own past, much like how I would if I had access to time travel technology. And many of the things they do is very similar to what I and my bioanth colleagues would do if we had the ability to go back and pick up members of our past in the flesh. We could do cultural studies, linguistic studies. So it does seem to be very anthropological in nature, but that's obviously a small part of it. There's seemingly much more going on.
And what about that idea stands out to you in comparison to something like the extraterrestrial hypothesis?
Yeah, great question. For me, from the very beginning, it was about what we call synapomorphies or homologies, characteristics that we share with one another that are indicative of common ancestry. So it's things like, well, starting very early, about 400 million years ago, or seemingly all tetrapods. We have 4 limbs. We're bipedal. In fact, that's the trait that defines the hominin lineage, pentadactyly, having 5 digits on each limb. All of these are characteristics that we share with other mammals, except for bipedalism. We're actually the only habitual biped. We're the only one that's upright walking all the time. And the fact that they are too, in nearly every case, there's some variation with regard to their physical form, but in almost every case, they are bipedal hominins with the same bilateral symmetry, 2 gut openings. They can breathe our air. They can have sex with us. They can seemingly reproduce with us, which is important in the context of the biological classification of species concept, which goes all the way back to Ray and Buffon and Linnaeus, that if you have 2 organisms that can mate and reproduce viable offspring, they are considered the same species. So you take all these things into account, not just the shared synapomorphies, the shared derived characteristics, as we call them, but also that they appear to have, or at least a lot of them, appear to have traits that are indicative of where we're going based on the last 6 to 8 million years of hominin evolution. So bigger, rounder heads, neurocranial globularity, as we say, bigger eyes, smaller noses, smaller faces, slender bodies, sort of a decreased pigmentation that's likely associated with self-domestication that began about 30,000 years ago. So long story short, there's a suite of characteristics that would seem to indicate that they're not just related to us and other mammals on this planet, but they are actually our evolutionary descendants based on their specific derived anatomical form.
Yeah, I have a funny story about that. The
I love
relation
funny
thing.
stories. Go on.
Well, I don't want to interject, and this interview is about
Man,
you.
what is life if it's not about funny stories? Come on.
Right. Also, actually, not funny, but so during one of my experiences, I had communication, and I didn't know what to make of it. Back in 2007, you know, I got you know, as part of the communication during one of these interactions was you know, that they were related to us, and especially at the time, I didn't know what to make of that.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And you know, there's other ways that could be interpreted, but I think the simplest, most parsimonious explanation is we're related genetically, phylogenetically, cladistically. So yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah. But you know, people are going to be aware by now that you participated in writing a paper that's caught in a lot of attention, uh as you know, you said probably not to your expectation, didn't think that the paper was going to get this much attention.
No, not at all.
But the paper is called the Cryptoterrestrial Hypothesis, a case for scientific openness to a concealed earthly explanation for unidentified anomalous phenomena. So again, as I said before this, I really like the languaging there. So just if you want to explain the title.
Yeah, so originally, and I should point out that Tim Lomas, the first author on that paper, he had been writing a series of papers and wanted to collaborate on some articles that highlight the different theories associated with the UAP phenomenon. I guess that's redundant. That's like saying chai tea.
Yeah,
but
we're
he
Americans.
yeah,
We
there's
can
another
do
one
that.
too. Some like Sahara Desert or Kalahari Desert or some desert. Anyway, so Tim had already put out a paper about the ultra-terrestrial theory and the extraterrestrial theory. And he brought me in to do some of these other ones, crypto-terrestrial, extraterrestrial, which we haven't gotten to yet. And some other collaborations with other notable researchers in the UK, Brazil, a well-known journalist as well. And yeah, so the main idea, and as it says in the title, is just to have a conversation to show that there is something here. We should be talking about it, and to start speculating about what they could be based on the evidence that's manifested itself throughout history and prehistory on this planet. So it is certainly a speculative paper. We're not claiming that they're here. You know, obviously people make clickbait articles to try to say something, but it's a theoretical paper based on a lot of indirect evidence that's accumulated throughout antiquity relating to this phenomenon, and just exploring this crypto-terrestrial idea. It's not our original idea, but we've taken it and brought in a lot of modern information that wasn't available to John Keel and Mac Tawney's and others, and really just try to advocate for scientific openness, as it says in the title and reiterates in the abstract, that we should move past, are these real? we've kind of beaten that horse to death. Let's revive it, hop on it, ride around, and see what there is to explore. And yeah, it's been good because I think the paper's done that on a much larger scale than any of us ever could have imagined, and perhaps to the chagrin of the other two authors on it. I've stretched this muscle before, so it's nothing new to me to get out there and have these conversations with a lot of different people about something we should all be talking about. And honestly, James, I got to tell you, it has been extremely positive. I kind of did something similar to this in 2019 when my first book came out, and there was still a lot of that laugh factor, and just nobody was really taking it seriously. And that wasn't because of anything I did. It's just where we were even 5 years ago. But now having very similar conversations with similar radio, TV, documentary people, it's a very different conversation. Like, people now are acknowledging that this is real. And hey, maybe it's time to start talking about who they are, what they're doing, where they come from, potentially when they come from. So it's been really good to see.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me that something like the CryptoTerrestrial hypothesis has been like in mainstream. This is something like from the UFO research underground. It's not even popular within ufology, really.
It's one of them, but it's not. Yeah, you're right. It is
I
kind of
mean,
funny.
even within ufology, it's kind of like, subspace of like people that will entertain that kind of thing. If you're taking the ancient aliens kind of perspective, I guess, where it's like the entertainment media portraying UFO intelligence as extraterrestrials. So, just the fact that you guys got this conversation going as it's language in the title, and just putting it out there into the morphogenetic field or what have you, it's that incredible. So well done on that. And
Yeah, and I guess, to that point, it, yeah, like I said, it kind of caught us all off guard. It happened so fast too. It was good to see. It was a little overwhelming also for me. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's been exhausting the last week or so. But yeah, it's good that it did what we wanted it to do: scientific openness, mainstream openness to this idea. And yeah, I'm hoping that, every little bit that everyone does to move the conversation forward is valuable. So if this has even a tiny drop in the bucket in achieving that goal, it's a net positive, I think.
yeah, I think so, because I never thought I would see the day where mainstream media is discussing and entertaining the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis. And
It's been weird.
yeah, well, and so while we're on that, what is the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis?
Well, yeah, for folks that aren't as familiar, or deep in the basement of ufology where you and I reside, um, it's the idea that rather than an extraterrestrial civilization, though we do include that in one of the four categories that we mentioned with regard to where they could be coming from, or when, or what are their origins. It's the simple idea that there's an advanced species that has sequestered itself here on this planet, or in its environs, as we say, potentially on the far side of the moon, or on the Earth itself, and the vast unexplored deep oceans, potentially in bases that exist in mountains. Mount Shasta is one of these. There's a hot spot in Mexico as well, where these things are constantly seen coming and going. And it makes sense why we don't see this constant coming and going of interstellar travel. We see UFOs all the time, thousands and thousands of cases every month. So the question is then, why don't we see these superhighways in space? NASA has acknowledged that space is unusually quiet. The time travel explanation makes sense if they're popping in and out of our four-dimensional space time. And also, it makes sense in the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis that they may live on this planet and hide out. And that could include a lot of things. So we really try to break down these four categories of how that could happen, which we can get into if you want. But the basic idea is just that they're here, they have been here, and they sort of show up in our time and in our space to do the things they're doing, which seemingly involves a lot of investigations of our physiology, the the procurement of our gametic material, sperm and egg, some sort of hybridization program that seemingly has tapered off, but was quite prominent throughout the 80s, 90s, and noughties. And yeah, and that would make sense if they were coming from another place too, that it saves time and energy to just make an encampment here and use any of the places we don't have access to as a home base, and then just launch their activities from those.
Yeah, and as you mentioned in the paper, you guys outline 4 potential categories of crypto-terrestrial. So you want to give a brief outline of those 4 categories of crypto-terrestrial?
Yeah, so the first one is just kind of your basic idea of what crypto-terrestrials were considered, and Mactoni's again really focused on this, that there could be some sort of advanced civilization that was decimated, destroyed. You always hear about this diluvial cataclysm, some type of flood, or some other thing. It could have been self-imposed too. And then the survivors of that sequestered themselves on Earth, or using their advanced technology somewhere around Earth. The second one is also pretty original to the crypto-terrestrial idea, where there's some sort of offshoot, whether it be hominin or even reptilian. If you go back far enough into our shared past, there could be a post-dinosaur species. There are still dinosaurs. Pretty much any that could fly or swim survive. Chickens are the descendants of dinosaurs. I put a little poster in my chicken coop and their egg basket, their laying box, that shows a dinosaur peeking through the clouds and says, "Remember who you are." It's kind of a motivational speech for them when they were little chicks. Doesn't seem to have helped, because 3 of them got eaten by a fox the day after I put that in there. I guess you can't just channel a T-Rex the way you would like to when you're being chased by a fox. So there's that idea. And then the third one sort of ties together the extraterrestrial and extraterrestrial, again, which I've largely advocated for over the years, that you could have them coming from a different planet, different star system. They set up shop on this planet, or they could be our future human descendants coming back through time, doing the same thing instead of having to constantly move forward and backward in time. And so with regard to that, I get the sense, or just based on the research I've done, that the saucer-shaped craft are the time machines themselves. Those are the ones that seem to be able to manipulate space-time. In my second book, the Extraterrestrial Model, I list a number of cases where they're clearly doing just that, with the Corporal Armando Valdez case, Linda Jones, Mike Dworshak. Case after case, they are shown doing, or specifically state, that they are altering the flow of space and time around these machines for various purposes. So those are likely time machines. They have a form indicative of the function of traveling through time, or at least manipulating space-time. However, you have these massive triangular craft, and I get the sense that maybe those were constructed here. You travel back to a specific time, maybe the early stages of that abduction and hybridization program, and then you can construct what I refer to in my second book as a massive floating fertility facility, because seemingly a lot of people are taken through here. They're stripped naked. They're moved like cattle through these corridors into these rooms. Sperm, eggs are taken. That's not something that could probably move through space-time, at least the way we understand it. So it kind of fits into this crypto-terrestrial model, where they might have come back through time, made a base, constructed something like this that stays in our time and is used for this specific purpose, and allows them to just wake up in the morning in our time and do these things that they're doing with this massive ship based on the far side of the moon or under the oceans or wherever. And the same thing could apply to the extraterrestrial model, but there's some issues with shared morphologies and how we could even interbreed or hybridize, things like that. Anyway, and then the fourth one is tries to capture more of the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, where we have these stories of fairies, fae, jinn, genies, angels, demons, these sort of mythical, magical creatures, based on how Arthur C. Clarke framed magic as something that's just a sophisticated technological species, where they do appear to have those aspects to the way they manifest, the way they interact with us. There's sort of an ethereal component to it. And so we wanted to capture that too. And they very well could be living amongst us as well, which would therefore make them crypto-terrestrial in the broad sense of the word.
Now, you said something very interesting right there, and it kind of got headlined, and people may assume different things about what that means: living amongst us, walking amongst us. Yeah, to what level do you think that in this hypothesis that could be a possibility, and like to what level?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think it depends on which version of those different theories we're talking about. Um, Clearly, it's a sophisticated, advanced technological species. However, it's also likely, if we focus on that fourth explanation more, that there's something more going on, that they maybe aren't even just in a materialistic sense, these physical embodied forms, but also we're interacting with this ultra advanced non-local consciousness. So in that capacity, we would then be interacting in that sort of fourth magical realm where telepathy can take place. There's clairvoyance, there's knowledge of the future. And a lot of things we see in biblical texts, even the Bible, for instance, there's case after case where you have sort of paranormal types of activities happening that manifest themselves in this folklore, these mores and folkways that are written about by people who don't really have the capacity to understand them. They exist so far outside of their reality. It's an incredible experience. They want to write it down, they want to document it, but they don't really have the faculties to conceptualize it in the way that we can with knowledge of electromagnetism. And we still poo-poo a lot of psi phenomena, of course, but we are starting to take that seriously. The Institute of Noetic Sciences is a great example of that, the Monroe Institute and others. Um, so yeah, I get the sense that there's a broad range there. It's hard to answer that question because if they're walking amongst us, are they the result of this hybridization where they were able to look like us because you could hybridize people from different times to get something that looks like anybody from any time? I talked about this in a lecture I gave in Phoenix last May, where you could take someone from 10,000 years in the future, someone from 20,000 years in the past, hybridize them, and they could walk amongst us because you've averaged out those phylogenetic characteristics, those evolutionary traits to get something or someone that could easily fit in with any member of society, but through potentially gene manipulation or just the evolution of these abilities, which we likely all have, these psi abilities, these seemingly paranormal abilities, they might seem magical to us. So there's that situation. There's the non-local consciousness thing where they're able to take over people's minds through sort of a form of mediumship, deep trance mediumship. So the walking amongst us question, I feel confident they are, but I think it's important to really be specific about what we mean by they in the context of them really integrating within our society.
Yeah, and you touched on a point there that was addressed in the DoD ATIP briefing, slide 9, the infamous slide 9, where they're talking about remote influence, that UAP has the capability of remote influence. And there's a caveat on that slide actually saying that we have somewhat of that capability as well. That's what it says on the slide. So there's interesting components to that. But I did want to ask, in regards to cryptoterrestrials, why did you guys choose to hone in on the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, rather than extraterrestrial? I mean, yeah. So why did you guys hone in on cryptoterrestrial specifically?
Well, like I said, Tim had already had this vision of doing these papers, and he contacted me about a year and a half ago, asking if I would be a part of it. Won't get into the details of this, but basically, I was over peer review publication process, journal publications. The whole thing is a bit of a sham, to be honest. But with some arm twisting, I agreed to do it. I jumped in on this one, and about three other papers we're working on that likely won't get the same amount of attention because they're a little more about perception of UFOs and how we can understand cases, how we can quantify those based on their validity, how they fit with reality, their anomalous characteristics. I'm equally excited about those papers, but there's not as much clickbait in those, so it probably won't be as broadly seen as this one was. But I'm actually kind of glad this one went viral because if the ultra terrestrial is interesting, there's a lot of merit to it. His extraterrestrial paper also sort of frames that. If it was even extra tempestrial, obviously I would sell more books if everybody's Googling that term all of a sudden. But this one was good. I think preferable even because it really brings a lot of the different theories together and allows people more of an opportunity to sort of see what fits with their own experiences or we gave the whole paper about a 10% probability, a very subjective number, but that's for all four of those together. But each one individually may have a higher probability than others. So, and it was interesting when this came out. I think Klaus was one of the first people to see it and post about it. And he posted a little screenshot of those four that we laid out pretty succinctly toward the end. And everybody's ranking them. They're like, well, I like three, and then two, four, one. And everybody's doing this because the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis isn't just one thing. Like the root of it is based on them being here, hiding in plain sight potentially as well, but it's not just one thing like extraterrestrial. They come from another planet. So it's kind of cool that this one exploded in the way it did because it allows people to not just expand their minds beyond UFOs are real, but expand them to include a number of possibilities that are encapsulated within the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis as a whole. So I was kind of happy that it happened this way as opposed to just one of the more specific types. Because it does bring those together. So yeah, that's all Tim. He was doing these individual papers and just to try to reach an audience through peer-reviewed publications, academic journals that don't have exposure to a lot of these things. They're not in the UFO community. They're not looking for books related to this stuff. So it seemingly did exactly what he had in mind. So kudos to him.
I mean, I don't know if there's really been so much time that you have a lot of feedback, but how has this been taken by academia and your peers?
Yeah, I mean, very early on, we were getting feedback from people who have been a part of this and are pretty well established. Like maybe they've been a part of To the Stars, or they're physicists that are pretty well known. I won't name names, but not that it probably matters. But it was good to see that from our peers who are knowledgeable about this subject. But then also, and kudos to Tim again for putting a case for scientific openness in the paper, because that's all we're trying to do. We're not claiming we have evidence for this. We're not claiming that this is real. We're just saying, let's be open to this possibility and have a conversation about it. So that makes it harder to really come at it and say, well, these people are crazy, because we're not saying anything definitively. We're just arguing in a theoretical paper that we should be having a conversation about these things. And that's all it's been. And therefore, the response, anecdotally, from my experience, has been extremely positive. I've been having conversations with all of these various media outlets, and it's been really grounded, informed conversations. Many of them read the damn paper, which you don't always see. A radio host in Calgary or Winnipeg or Toronto, I forget which one it was, but they read the whole paper before they interviewed me in an 8 to 10 minute segment. So that's pretty short to read a 40,000 word journal article. So people are considering it. They're taking it seriously. They're asking informed questions and really elevating the conversation, which has been really great to see.
Yeah, and again, I can't overstate that. Just the idea that the term crypto terrestrials now forever implanted in pop culture is, I never thought I would see that. So it
Yeah.
just speaks to the times, I guess, the progress and openness and thinking in regards to UAP. Of course, especially post 2017 with the Helena Cooper, Leslie Kane, and Ralph Blumenthal
Yeah. And that really
article.
kicked it off and allowed us to begin to take it seriously. And that was so helpful for me. Like I was almost done with my first book. It would come up in conversation and I could drop that mic. I could be like, well,
Yeah.
actually, the New York Times front page article acknowledged there's a $22 million black money program. And people go, oh, that's interesting. And think about how far we've come just since 2017.
Yeah.
And then you have Grush, you have Lou Elizondo, you have all of these other people that have really legitimized this conversation. And I've just kind of been waiting in the wings as a theory guy to be able to have this moment where we can move beyond, yes, this is real, and start diving into some of the theoretical components of it.
Right. And even some of the comments that David Grush made lends a little bit of openness to the argument, or not argument, but the ideas that you guys are addressing in the paper, when he used terms like interdimensional, right? Not saying that's exactly what they are, but to try to explain an idea of that it's not just the extraterrestrial hypothesis where they're just coming from other planets, where there's something more complex going on.
Yeah, and that was huge. That was absolutely huge to moving the ball further down the field, to use a sports analogy.
Yeah, and again, the walking among us or living among us, that idea being posted out in the mainstream, in a somewhat serious manner. I mean, there's a little bit of snark, but overall, it's being posted seriously as a question, and your paper is behind it. And it reminds me of I think it was in October of 2017, 2 months before the New York Times article came out, that Robert Bigelow was on 60 Minutes, and he's laughing. He's like, they're here, they're right under our noses, and he's laughing about it. He's like, you don't have to go anywhere. And then later on, James Fox reported that he had a private meeting with Bigelow some years ago, and Bigelow had told him that they are walking among us. And Bigelow has an interesting vantage point, having the OSAP contract and so on, and all the other
and
accesses.
Skinwalker Ranch too, everything he learned from that.
Yeah, and although the researchers that he funded that got him different things as well, and I'm sure he made connections in aerospace contracting, defense, that people might have shared ideas with him.
Yeah, no doubt. And real quick, I should mention that even though the conversation has leveled up, you do still have that kind of closed-minded snark factor with certain demographics. You still hear the X-Files theme music played on intros and stuff like that. I'm certainly not saying it's completely gone, but just the conversation from my vantage point over the last week and a half has been very different than previously, but there's still some of that, I should clarify.
Yeah, there is. And I mean, again, we're at a point in time in paradigm, right? If I can even say that, in kind of global consensus where there is no consensus. There's so much divisiveness that if there was, like, let's say, the president of the United States or any other country or the Pope or whoever it is, any denomination comes out and says, UFO intelligence is real, they're non-human intelligence, and they've been interacting with us, there's still going to be a great amount of pushback where people are
Mhm.
just not going to believe it because
Yeah.
they distrust the official narrative.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, we live in a world of tribalism right now, vast tribalism that's perpetuated by algorithms and various polarizing media takes. So yeah, something that's already a little divisive or out there, hard to wrap your head around, is naturally going to do that to the same extent.
Yeah, and again, I get even if they rolled out the craft and bodies, there's going to be people saying that's fake.
Mm,
You
yeah,
know,
no doubt, no doubt.
just so that's that's an obstacle. I think that to some extent is going to be always be going to be there, but more or less the conversation has moved a great deal forward. Mm.
Yeah, no, it has, and it's good to see. But you're right. That's a good point. There's the time in which we live is an obstacle unto itself.
But so that's a funny question. Is this kind of like the right, is the timing right where that has made this possible, right? That I always think about that. Um, it kind of slipped in under the radar, so to speak, and it's in the way it is now because we're in that time.
Yeah, that's a good point too. It's almost like if you're having a bad day with negative vibrational energy, the demons can get into you and take over. It's like we're also preoccupied with everything else in the next election cycle that, yeah, maybe we all just wanted a little break from that. And this idea that there could be some more advanced, sophisticated civilization or even individuals walking amongst us, maybe it's escapism to some extent or yeah, just allowed for by the time that we're in because we're being bombarded constantly with different views and worldviews. So why not let this one in?
Well, because there's like an overload of information, but also I feel like that we're in a period of time where even though it's hard for some people to admit it, like I think there's like an implied kind of idea that like we're with this crazy access to information, the internet, like I think we're really realizing, even maybe on a subconscious level, individually and collectively, that we really don't know as much as we thought we did.
Mm,
And because of that, kind of all these ideas are of everything, right, are up in
yeah,
question. And that kind of um, mindset, if I can borrow from Exo Academian and Nathan, is kind of liminal, right?
yeah.
We're collectively we're in like this liminal phase of awareness and idea. I think
Yeah, that's a really good point too. There seems to be an ebb and flow throughout history where we've got it figured out. We got the gaps for a while, and then Galileo's challenges that, and then we scienced the gaps almost to an extreme too, where we thought we had everything figured out. There's no more questions. And I remember growing up in the '90s, like having sort of that idea, oh, there's nothing left to do. I went into physics and astronomy. It's like, well, what other questions are left? And obviously, there's
yeah
so many. And yeah, it's a really good point that we might be in this place where we're starting to be humbled by the fact that we don't know everything. So it makes just a little crack in the door where we can start to push that door open and explore some of these things with an open mind because we're aware that we don't have it all figured out.
yeah. And I mean I really appreciate the UAP or the UFO subject in that regard.
Hmm.
um
It's instrumental for sure.
yeah, because it's I say this all the time now, that the UFO is like a bridge between physics and metaphysics,
Hmm.
because it's a seemingly objectively physical object, uh, and yet it's demonstrating things that we would consider metaphysical. And
Yeah.
so, how is that possible, right? So
Hmm.
it's like a gateway drug, um, for I don't know, like a transcendental mindset in different ways, even in regards to physics, right? Because it makes you question all those things.
Yeah, and what's unfortunate is you have a lot of people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, for instance, Bill Nye, Adam Frank, who are these physicists, cosmologists, and I'm not trying to talk shit about them. They've made contributions in their own right, but because it doesn't fit, they say, well, no, that can't be real, rather than saying, well, there's a lot we don't know. Let's figure out how this is impossible based on our understanding, our limited understanding, especially when it comes to space and time, which are emergent phenomenon. Time for sure, possibly space as well, according to Sean Carroll. So instead of opening their worldview to include the possibility of these things, a lot of them will just shut it down and say, no, that can't be the case. And that's the opposite of what we should be doing. And it's the opposite of how we move forward, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I do want to pivot for a minute because originally when I was going to have you on, I wanted to talk about your experience.
Yeah, it's done that for me big time. I have
So
flipped, according to Jeff
Jeff
Kripal,
Kripal,
his
yeah.
terminology.
So people that are watching and listening to this right now might not know that you've had an experience. So would you like to say how did that all happen and what was the experience?
Well, I mean, I don't think we have time to really go into the whole account. I told it to a buddy of mine when we were out sighting in our rifles before elk season in the fall, and it took the entire way down the mountain to even get the entire
Yeah, no.
account like out, because there's pieces that all fit together in a weird way that I didn't understand until it all happened. But if you wanted to link in your show notes, I would recommend Jesse Michael's doco, of course, is the first time I ever talked about it openly. But then at your event, UNJ's event, and Leslie too, the Inquiry into Anomalous Phenomena, I had more time to go into it. And I believe Kelly Chase posted that to her podcast, UFO Rabbit Hole, as they're working on the Beyond documentary, doco series. So people could listen to that. But as to your question, I mean, really it was reality shattering, Jungian ontological shock, challenged, my notions of what ego is, space and time, just even human consciousness, the brain, really I've never been one of those people that thinks the brain is at the root of consciousness. I think the brain is more of an antenna and a transducer of sorts, where things can kind of move through it. And obviously, we form memories, we upload information back into that realm. My personal belief is that we do that every night when we sleep. It's a common characteristic of all animals, that they sleep. And I can't help but wonder if that's us channeling our experiences back into this on a nightly basis, as opposed to waiting for that sort of life movie to replay. And it just doesn't make sense that it would happen just at the end of that. I kind of got off track there. I apologize. It's my own personal belief systems coming through here a little bit. But yeah, as far as what happened, basically, I was considered a mini abduction. Two people approached me, and through them was speaking this highly advanced non-local consciousness. At first, vocally, they knew my individual thoughts that I'd never said to anyone. That's kind of how they broke me down initially. It was saying something that was just a thought in my head. They referenced a conversation I had had with them, these same others, about 8 months prior to this, that I had just written off as being all in my head, my internal monologue. They referenced something specific that was said in that. And I think a lot of that was because it was easy for me to ignore. Because I am a recovering materialist, I still have that aspect to my personality. It was beaten into me throughout graduate school and in much of my academic career. I think I needed a physical representation, a physical interaction for me to wake up and take it seriously. But the things that happened in that interaction really took me to a different place and made me question a lot of things about the relationship between this sort of consciousness, light source, and this physical world that we manifest in. And I really struggled with that for about a month, I'd say, in a pretty hard negative way. And then since then, over the course of the last year and a half, it's become normalized to some extent. It's much more tangible, understandable. I can sort of work within this new mindscape, this new frame of existence that I didn't even know was a part of reality before. So yeah, it really is that classic flip. I feel like I was already kind of flipping before. I've always been open to these questions, even though I'd never had an anomalous experience. I'd never seen a UFO. I was still passionately investigating it and open-minded to these things. But once I was brought into this world and sort of levitated above my body to some extent, and communicating telepathically in this way, it really did shift my worldview tremendously.
And when did that event happen?
It was October 14th, 2022, at a conference in Phoenix, Mesa, Arizona, technically. International UFO Congress is what it was.
So in regards to UFOs, how did that change your perspective from somebody who is kind of just investigating UFOs and never had an anomalous experience to then having this kind of in your face experience? How did your view of the UFO phenomenon shift?
Yeah, it's a great question. Not really at all. To be honest, there was no UFO present. It didn't involve being taken into a craft or anything like that. What transpired in this interaction was very much akin to what people describe in interactions with these more advanced beings, potentially future human, potentially something else. The telepathic form of communication obviously is a thread that runs through all of that. But even having never seen a UFO until actually right around this time, it was within a year of this experience, I did see 5 UFOs near my house, hovering in formation, and then one by one, the classic, shoot off at tremendous speed. And the fact that they did it from right to left, they were clearly all together doing whatever it was they were doing, and demonstrating those anomalous aerial maneuvers as well in synchronicity, or at least one by one. So I didn't need to see a UFO to take it seriously. I was convinced, but potentially because I'm an anthropologist and we use a lot of observational data to form hypotheses and to test those, I didn't need to see it to believe it. Same with psi phenomena like this, future knowledge, clairvoyance, telepathy, all of those things that took place within this contact experience. I was already convinced they did exist, but then when it happened to me, it was a little different because I was forced to just like wait, what's happening right now? This is weird. But then as it unfolded, as the interaction became more strange, I guess, less within the circumscribed borders of our physical reality, it also opened me up to an awareness that this is maybe more real than reality. And a lot of people touch this through acid trips or psychedelics, DMT. I wasn't on anything. I'd only had one beer the entire night, in fact. But being taken into this realm that exists all around us, but not being really aware of it until they brought me there, opened up a lot for me. So I was curious, interested, aware, but until I had that experience personally and with what happened specifically, it definitely changed my perception of all of it, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I think maybe your vantage point.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the themes that comes up more recently in a serious way has been crash retrievals, right? David Grush has talked about it. reverse engineering programs, crash retrieval programs of UFOs. How does that, how do you see that tying in with the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis and or the extraterrestrial hypothesis?
Yeah, also a great question. It was kind of fun. I explored the Roswell crash as a case study with regard to the bootstrap paradox in my second book. Maybe it was the first one, I don't remember. Where you could potentially have something, if it does come from the future, where it goes back in time, it crashes, the people in that past reverse engineer it, eventually build the thing that the people in the future, in their relative future, use to go back into the past. And it's called a bootstrap paradox, even though there's nothing paradoxical about it. The only reason we consider it that way is because it violates our notions of linear time, where you have a past cause and a future effect. But with regard to something like a crash that happens that interjects that information and that technology into the past, there is no real creator. And that's something that people struggle with too. It's like trying to find the corner of a ball. It's just a rounded surface. It's always there. It's always connected. It's this infinite loop through space-time, so to speak, where you can have a future cause and a past effect and vice versa. They're just sort of there. The information always existed. There is no creator, and that violates our preconceived notions of cause and effect and linear time, but there's nothing actually paradoxical about it. So in a way, if these are future human time machines, we are in the process of creating the thing that they will eventually use to come back in time for all of these various purposes. Clearly, we don't have it completely figured out, or they wouldn't crash at all. How it relates to the cryptoterrestrial model specifically, I think it's another indication that they are here a lot. If we take all of, and I think it was Leonard Stringfield maybe, wrote this whole long list of all of the crashes that he could document. And I apologize if it was someone else that did that, but I'm pretty sure it was him. And it's massive. It's this huge list going back to the 30s, 40s. So if that's the case, it does indicate maybe something more than just they're coming from a different planet. It doesn't seem like it'd be that hard to figure out how to enter our atmosphere and interact with us. If they're jumping through space-time, it interjects a number of other variables into that equation. And possibly things where they didn't understand very specific, seemingly innocuous things, or things that don't exist in their time that could affect the functionality of their craft and make them crash. You hear about radar being an example of that. So I don't know. I mean, I think it does also indicate that if there were issues with traveling through space or jumping through time and space, that it does make more sense to get used to this environment, hide yourself where you can, construct bases where you can operate in these times, where you can account for all of these variables in a very easy capacity because you're here, you can test all of these things in this time and space. So I think it does play into these theories, and cryptoterrestrial especially, because they would be incentivized to do that. I think it would be pretty logical and obvious that they would want to just make a base here and figure things out in the space and time to carry on with all of the activities that they're engaged in.
Yeah, and I mean, if do you think that at some, I mean, nobody can really know this for sure, right? But what's your idea of some kind of collective or open contact scenario with whatever? I mean, again, the UFO phenomenon could be a number of things. It doesn't have to be just cryptoterrestrial and or extraterrestrial. We could be seeing a number of different things at play. But what, just even cryptoterrestrial or extraterrestrial, what's your idea in regards to like a collective or open contact?
You talking about the big D, the disclosure, like
On their end, not,
yeah. No, I get the sense, and I've heard others make this analogy. I think Gary Nolan made it recently at the SALT conference about the ants. Like we can't just sit down on the ground with some ants and have an informed conversation with them because we exist at such different levels of technology and consciousness. I do get the sense, even having conversations like these, that and looking back through antiquity too, with biblical interactions that are so similar to what has been happening, and even the CIA acknowledges things like what they call it, unexpected, unplanned pregnancies, or they use a different word, anomalous pregnancies, the same types of things, where Jesus came from. It's seemingly a very anomalous phenomena with the original birth story there, and countless others like it. The angel Gabriel knew the future, came down as an angel, appeared in dreams. There's so many correlations with what's been happening and what's been documented in various forms, not necessarily because they were happening differently. They may have been the exact same things happening, but they're just manifested or written about in different ways, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, maybe that we're now getting to the point where we can start having conversations in a more informed way based on our understanding of science, our understanding of consciousness, and that might be pinging these more advanced beings that have been interacting with us throughout history and prehistory to start to ready us for contact, for taking the big D, so to speak. And in that capacity, it does kind of seem like that's already happening. I've said for a while that what's happening in Congress is seemingly trying to catch up or to get ahead of something that they're fully aware is coming, rather than them leading the charge to inform people. Even the stupid balloon thing we were dealing with last year, where they're shooting down these balloons, they're being real cryptic about what they are and what it means, where they come from. That may have just been testing our readiness to accept these things. Neuro-linguistic programming. Darren uses that all the time too, exoacademia. And I think that's a lot of what's happening is they're putting things out or allowing things to come out or manufacturing scenarios that put us in a position where the populace as a whole can start to have a baseline for if this does happen, if we do take the D, that we're going to be ready for it, that we're sort of our minds are stretched to some extent so that it's an easier form of penetration.
Yeah. And what do you I mean, do you think that would be really like disruptive at this point?
I think it'll be destructive for certain segments of the population. Others have said, I don't remember who, but others have said it'll be destructive for things like organized religion. And this was really what my third book was about to a large extent. It was sort of a hidden theme. The book itself is more about different timelines and impending apocalypse and what we can do by going back through time to mitigate the effects of that or potentially to stop it. And it's kind of a fun drug and sex filled jaunt through time in order to fulfill that end. But at the root of it is also kind of what happens in the future after contact, what happens when we know. And I don't think it will necessarily be destructive. It will definitely challenge a lot of ingrained worldviews amongst a large percentage of the population, especially Judeo-Christian worldviews, where a lot of these things that they believe in may have been UFO related or paranormal related. Jesus was paranormal as shit, like everything he did, like the healing, the energy, the clairvoyance, the future knowledge, like levitation, all of these things are associated with these UFOs and aliens. So if that came out, I think it would be disruptive in that capacity. However, like we were talking about earlier, it may just be like, well, no, because it's a belief system. It doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter what evidence there is. If you have a strongly held belief system, you'll just carry on with that. So maybe not. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and cross-check myself there because I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't matter because of these deeply held beliefs. As far as like political structures, economic structures, I think it's a net positive. I think we emerge from that as a better species who recognizes all of us and everything and everyone, and recognize that this little blue ball we're floating around on is all we have, and maybe we should do better taking care of it.
And do you think that UFO intelligence or non-human intelligence wants us to be aware of their presence?
Yeah, I think so. I think they have for a while. I was just talking to Patrick at Vetted yesterday. He said he just had you on recently as well. That's why I mentioned him. And we were having this conversation about they don't just make themselves fit into our understanding of reality and physics and space and time at any given point in the past when they've been interacting with us, but they're seemingly challenging it. They're making us think about what these could be, because they defy our sense of understanding of the universe. So that I would guess that's calculated, that they want us to see them. They want us to challenge the things we know and think we know. Like you said earlier, this is one of the best ways to do this. The bridge between physics and metaphysics is get us to recognize we don't know everything about physics, that we need to start opening our minds. Instead of saying that's impossible, try to figure out how these things are possible because they are real. So I think we're being pushed in that direction, and I think that's also a good thing. We could all benefit from being humble with regard to our scientific understanding and sense of reality.
Yeah, and just as a final question, what would you want people to take away from both the crypto terrestrial paper that you've written and even your books?
Well, I mean, I guess the whole reason I've been doing this over the last 12 or 15 years is just to get more of the theoretical aspects out, to get more of the conversation about what they could be. And like I said, I don't, I don't have some desperate grasp that I'm hanging on to this extra tempestrial model. Like, I do think it helps explain a lot of the phenomenon. Can't help explain all of it, but much like this crypto terrestrial paper, it does provide some context for having a discussion. And that, I feel like that's a big part of what I was trying to do with my books too, is say, look, I'm not saying this is the case, but let's look at what's going on with regard to UFOs and the way they manifest and what they're doing and what the beings look like and how the craft moves and how it operates. And then try to deduce from that what they could be, where or when they might be coming from. And so it was kind of cool that this paper blew up in that way, because that was the main point of this paper too. So in a way, it was kind of a continuation of that underlying mission with a slightly different version of the model, different way of thinking about those overarching questions that we should be talking about. We should be having this conversation, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on here, Mike. I appreciate your time. I definitely love to talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, that'd be
I
awesome.
definitely want to talk more about your experience sometime, and I'm sure some of your upcoming papers that will eventually come out with your colleagues. That'll be interesting to see. So,
Yeah.
where can
Uh,
people find your work? I'm going to link it all in the description, but for people listening as well.
Yeah, I mean, the books are on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. I do signed copies through my Etsy page because it's easier through there. I always obviously advocate for going to a bookstore and having getting it through them. The brick and mortars are sort of the bedrock of our society through time. I also have a website, michaelpmasters.com. There's a contact form on there, and I don't really update it as much with like talks and conferences and things, but it is a good way to interact with people. So I continue to do that through there. And sometimes I will actually update conferences. I haven't been doing as many because I was recently made chair of my department. And that is a massive time suck, as it turns out. I've got a number of other projects going on. Yeah, so I had to bail on 4 conferences I was supposed to present at this
Yeah.
year. And I did it long before they announced the speakers, so it didn't disrupt them. But I've had to sort of claw back some time. I'm doing fewer interviews, I'm doing fewer conferences, just for life and university obligations. But I do try to update those when they happen because they're fewer and far between now.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you coming here. So great talking to you, Michael, and take care.
You as well. Thanks, James.
Thanks.